The pod hit the canopy like a meteor wrapped in fire. Branches thick as telephone poles shattered against the hull, slowing the deadly descent just enough that David Shun might survive the impact. Metal screamed. Something in his chest cracked. Then everything went silent except for the hissing of cooling metal and his own ragged breathing. David hung upside down in the harness for several seconds before his engineer brain kicked back online. Check for injuries. 3 ribs on the left side, probably cracked. Right ankle swollen. Head pounding, but no vision problems. He could work with that. The release catch fought him, corroded from atmospheric entry, but finally gave way. He dropped onto the pod ceiling, grunting as his ribs reminded him they were damaged. The emergency kit had survived in its reinforced compartment. Basic tools, 5 days of rations, medical supplies, water purification tablets, and a survival knife. Not much for staying alive on an unknown world, but David had built functioning equipment from less. He forced the hatch open and immediately regretted it. The smell hit him first. Rot and musk, and something sharp like ozone after lightning. The jungle outside was wrong in ways his earth-trained senses couldn't quite process. Trees with bark that looked like overlapping scales. Vines that pulsed with slow rhythms. Leaves in colors that didn't exist in any forest back home. And the sounds. Clicks and hisses and low-frequency rumbles that vibrated in his damaged ribs. David pulled himself out of the pod and stood on trembling legs. 3 moons hung in the purple sky, 2 rising and 1 setting. That meant insane tidal forces if there was water nearby. It meant this planet pulled at everything with uneven gravity. It meant every creature here had evolved to survive conditions that would kill most Earth species. Something screamed in the distance. Something else answered with a roar that shook leaves from branches. David started gathering materials. The pod's power cells were intact. He could use them for basic defense systems, maybe lights to keep nocturnal predators away. The hull panels would make decent walls or a roof. Emergency foam could seal gaps. He worked methodically, ignoring the pain in his ribs and ankle, because staying busy meant not thinking about how utterly alone he was. By the time the first sun started setting, he had dragged useful materials to the base of a massive tree. The trunk was wide enough that 3 men couldn't wrap their arms around it. The lowest branches started 20 feet up. Good. Climbing predators would have to work for their meal. David used emergency foam to create handholds up the trunk. His ribs screamed with each reach, each pull, but he kept climbing. At the first major branch, he started building. Hull panels lashed together with salvage cable. A platform large enough to lie down on. Foam to seal the edges. It wasn't pretty, but it would keep him off the ground. The second sun set while he worked. The jungle sounds changed immediately. The daytime noises, already unsettling, were replaced by something worse. Wet breathing from multiple directions. The crack of branches under heavy weight. A snuffling sound that circled his tree. David activated a chemical light stick and wedged it into the platform. Pale green glow pushed back the darkness, maybe 10 feet. Beyond that, the jungle was absolute black. He ate half a ration bar and purified some water from his canteen. His hands shook. Adrenaline crash, he told himself. Just a body processing stress. Nothing to do with the growing certainty that he was being watched. Hours passed. David dozed in fits, jerking awake whenever a sound got too close. Around what his internal clock said was midnight. Something big moved beneath his tree. He heard claws scraping bark. Heard the tree actually creak under sudden weight. David held his breath. The climbing sound stopped maybe 15 feet below his platform. Heavy breathing, then a long, considering silence. Whatever it was had found him, was deciding if the effort of climbing higher was worth the meal. After 5 minutes that felt like 5 hours, the creature descended. David heard it settle into the undergrowth nearby. Waiting, that he stayed awake the rest of the night, watching the perimeter of his small light. Twice he saw eyes reflecting the glow. Large eyes, set wide apart. Predator eyes. Once something that looked like it had too many legs skittered across a nearby branch. He gripped his knife uselessly. What good was a 6-inch blade against creatures evolved on a death world? When the first sun rose, David could finally see what surrounded him. The jungle floor was a battlefield. Claw marks on every tree, bones scattered in clearings, dark stains that might be blood or might be something worse. And tracks. So many tracks. Some small as his fist, others large enough that his whole body could fit inside the impression that he was living in the middle of a killing ground. But David was an engineer. Engineers solved problems. They built solutions. And right now, his problem was simple: survive long enough to be rescued. His solution would have to be equally simple: build something these predators couldn't ignore. He climbed down carefully, ribs protesting every movement. The pod had more materials he needed, and if the creatures came for him during the day, well, he would deal with that when it happened. David had survived a crash landing. He could survive this. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that beneath the canopy dozens of eyes were already watching. The predators of this world had never seen anything like him. They had never seen something build. They had never seen something plan, and they were very, very curious about what he would do next. Fresh claw marks scarred the tree trunk, deep gouges that started at ground level and climbed 15 feet before stopping. David traced them with shaking fingers, seeing where the bark had been torn away in strips. Something had climbed up during the night, had stopped just below where he slept, had chosen not to finish the climb. That bothered him more than if it had attacked. Predators didn't show restraint. They killed or they didn't. There was no middle ground in nature. But this thing had stopped, had made a choice. David pushed the thought away and focused on work. Work was simple. Work made sense that he spent the morning hauling pieces from the crash pod. His ankle had swollen worse overnight, turning purple and angry. He fashioned a brace from hull fragments and kept moving. The pain was just data, his body telling him what was damaged. He could work around data. The power cells became the foundation of his plan. He wired 3 of them together in a circuit, creating a pulse generator. Every 30 seconds, it would emit a sonic burst, high-frequency sound waves that shouldn't exist in this jungle. Most Earth predators hated unexpected noises. He was betting these alien hunters would too. David planted the generators in a rough circle around the largest clearing near his tree, 30 feet across, enough space to build something real. He activated them one by one, watching the jungle. The effect was immediate. Creatures he hadn't even known were there suddenly bolted from the undergrowth. A thing like a wolf made of knives and hunger. Something that flowed more than ran, all wrong angles and too many joints. A scaled hunter that had been pressed flat against a tree trunk, nearly invisible until it moved. They all retreated beyond his new perimeter, then stopped and watched. David gathered fallen branches and started building. A proper shelter this time, not just a sleeping platform. He used the pod's remaining hull for walls, sealing gaps with foam. Added a raised floor to keep out crawling things. Cut a hole for smoke and started a fire using chemical igniters from the emergency kit. The fire changed everything. The watching creatures went insane, screaming, roaring, backing away from something they had never encountered. Fire didn't exist here. This jungle was too wet, the atmosphere too thick with moisture. Lightning might strike, but flames never caught, never spread. Until now, David fed the fire carefully, keeping it small and controlled. He had limited fuel, but the psychological effect was worth the resource cost. The predators kept their distance, eyes reflecting the flames. Afraid, but unable to look away, he worked through the day, ignoring his body's complaints. Built a raised platform for sleeping. Rigged a water collection system using pod fragments and local leaves. Started smoking some of the emergency rations to make them last longer. Every action was deliberate. Every choice made to extend his survival one more day. When the first sun set, David sat by his fire and waited. They came as darkness fell. Not rushing in for a kill, just settling into watching positions. He counted 7 distinct shapes in the firelight's reach. Probably more beyond it. One creature sat closer than the others. Large, covered in gray-brown fur that looked coarse as wire. Built low to the ground like a bear, but longer, more streamlined. Its eyes caught the firelight and threw it back in amber sparks. David had seen those eyes before. This was the one that had climbed his tree. "Hey there, ugly," David said quietly. Speaking helped, made the jungle feel less empty. "You're the curious one, aren't you? The one who wants to know what I am." The gray hunter, as he started thinking of it, tilted its head, studying him. David tossed a piece of emergency ration into the space between them. The bar landed in the dirt and sat there. The gray hunter's eyes flicked to it, then back to David. Didn't approach, just watched. Over the next 3 days, David expanded his camp. The sonic generators kept most predators at bay, but he added physical barriers too. A fence of sharpened branches, trip wires rigged to noisemakers. Anything to buy him seconds if something decided to test his defenses. The gray hunter came every night, sometimes alone, sometimes with others. A smaller rust-colored hunter that moved in quick bursts. A massive thing covered in overlapping scales that made sounds like grinding stone. David started leaving scraps of food at the perimeter. The predators wouldn't take them while he watched, but by morning the offerings were always gone. It became routine. He would build during the day. They would watch. At night, he would leave food. They would wait until he slept to take it. On the 4th day, David woke to find something new at the camp's edge. A carcass. Something like a deer, but with 6 legs and crystalline horns. Its throat torn out cleanly. Fresh kill. The gray hunter sat 30 feet away, watching him. Waiting, David stared at the dead animal. At the predator. Understanding slowly dawned. "You brought this for me," he said. Not a question. The gray hunter didn't move, but its eyes tracked David as he approached the kill. As he started processing the meat with his knife. As he cut portions and set them to smoke over his fire. David took one cooked piece and walked to the perimeter. The gray hunter tensed but didn't flee. He placed the meat on a flat stone and backed away. The hunter approached slowly, sniffed the cooked meat, then ate it in one bite. Something had changed. David didn't understand what. Didn't understand the rules of this strange exchange. But the gray hunter had brought him food, and he had shared it back, transformed by fire into something new. The predator settled at the edge of firelight. Not leaving, not attacking, just watching the human work. David's trap was simple but effective. A deadfall triggered by pressure, designed to catch one of the small rabbit-like creatures that grazed in the clearing at dawn. He needed protein. The emergency rations were running low, and while the gray hunter had brought food twice more, David couldn't rely on that self-sufficiency was survival. He checked the trap at first light and found it sprung. The small animal was already dead, neck broken cleanly. David reached for it and froze. The gray hunter stood 10 feet away, and it wasn't alone. Behind the familiar predator was something new, enormous, easily twice the size of the hunter, with a hide like burnished copper and fangs as long as David's forearm. It held something in its jaws, something large and bleeding that David's hand moved slowly to his knife. The massive predator watched him with unsettling intelligence. Then it stepped forward, muscles rippling under that copper hide, and dropped its kill at the edge of his camp. The IT was fresh, still warm. Some kind of scale beast that probably weighed 300 pounds. The copper giant backed away and sat, waiting. David looked from the tiny creature in his trap to the massive carcass. His engineer brain started calculating. This wasn't random. The predator had seen him set the trap, had understood he was trying to catch food, and had brought something better. That IT was trade. David took his knife and approached the copper predator's offering. The creature tensed but didn't move. He cut away a large section of meat, enough for several days, and dragged it to his fire. The rest he left. Fair trade, David said, knowing the words meant nothing but needing to say them anyway. You bring the kill. I take what I need. The rest is yours. He started processing the meat, cutting it into strips for smoking. Behind him, he heard the copper giant approach its kill. Heard it feeding. When David glanced back, the gray hunter was also eating, the two predators sharing the carcass without fighting. That night, more shapes gathered at the perimeter. David counted 12 distinct creatures. Some he recognized. Others were new. They sat beyond the firelight, just at the edge of visibility, waiting that he cooked portions of the copper giant's gift and placed them on flat stones around his camp's boundary. One for each watcher. then retreated to his fire. The predators approached in order of size. The copper giant first, then the gray hunter, then the rust-colored runner, and the scaled creature, and others David hadn't named yet. Each took their portion and retreated to eat. That it became ritual over the following days. They would bring kills. He would take what he needed and return some cooked by fire. The predators learned to wait, learned that the human would share, learned that his camp was a place of strange but predictable rules. David used the peace to expand. He built a better water filtration system, created a storage area for smoked meat, reinforced his shelter against the daily rains. The watching predators observed every action with intense focus, as if trying to understand why he did these things. That on the 8th day, since the crash, the rust-colored runner appeared at the perimeter carrying something small that David's breath caught. A pup, tiny compared to its mother, maybe the size of a house cat. And it was hurt. The runner set her pup down gently, then backed away. But she didn't leave. Her eyes locked on David's. The message was clear even across the barrier of species. Help. David's hands were shaking as he gathered his medical kit. This was insane. That runner could tear him apart in seconds. The pup could bite clean through his hand with those needle teeth. But the mother had brought her injured young to him, had chosen to trust the strange builder in the glowing camp that he approached slowly, hands visible, making soft sounds. The pup whimpered. Up close, David could see the wound. A deep gash across its hind leg, already infected. Green pus leaked from torn flesh. The mother could have killed him 3 times while he cleaned the wound. Could have ended him while he applied antibiotic cream from his kit. Could have destroyed him while he wrapped the leg in sterile bandages. But she sat like a statue, every muscle ready to spring, but holding perfectly still. David finished and backed away. The pup was crying, scared and hurting. The mother moved forward immediately, gathering her baby and retreating to the jungle's edge. But she didn't leave. She settled there with her pup tucked against her side, watching, protecting. Word spread through the jungle in ways David couldn't understand. By the next evening, 3 more injured predators waited at his perimeter. A scaled hunter with a broken foreleg. The copper giant nursing deep cuts across its shoulders. Something that looked like a cross between a lizard and a wolf, covered in infected bite marks. David treated them all. Used his limited medical supplies, because what else could he do? They had come to him, had trusted him, and somehow, in ways that made no logical sense, they understood he could help. His camp changed. It wasn't just a place to get cooked meat anymore. It was a place where injuries were tended, where the weak could rest without being killed by rivals, where the strange human with his fire and his tools would fix what was broken. The predators started defending the perimeter. David watched in amazement as a new creature, something massive with too many claws, tried to approach his camp. The gray hunter and copper giant intercepted it together, drove it away with savage efficiency. They were protecting him, protecting his camp, protecting this strange place where prey and predator could exist in the same space without violence. David sat by his fire that night, surrounded by sleeping predators. The rust-colored runner with her bandaged pup, the scaled hunter with its splinted leg. Others he was starting to recognize as individuals he had crashed on a death world, had expected to die alone and afraid. Instead, he had accidentally built something impossible, a sanctuary in the middle of hell. The new arrival made every predator in camp go still. That it emerged from the deep jungle just after dawn, moving with the careful precision of something that had never known fear. Scales like black glass covered its body, each one ending in a razor edge. When it walked, those scales clicked together, making sounds like knives being sharpened. It was massive, easily the size of a small car, built low and wide like a living tank. David stood slowly, knife in hand. Useless against something like that, but holding it made him feel slightly less helpless. The blade-scale creature stopped at the camp perimeter. Its eyes were different from the others. Larger, more focused. It looked at David the way David looked at a complex machine. Studying, understanding, then it made a sound. Low frequency, almost below hearing. A rumble that vibrated in David's chest. The gray hunter appeared at David's side. The copper giant on his other side, both tense but not attacking, waiting to see what the human would do. The blade-scaled creature rumbled again, then turned and walked back toward the jungle. Stopped. Looked back at David. "You want me to follow?" David said. It wasn't a question. This was insane. Following an apex predator into unknown territory. But something in its eyes, in its deliberate movements, told him this wasn't an attack. It was a request. David grabbed his medical kit and followed. The gray hunter and copper giant came too, flanking him like guards. They walked for 20 minutes through increasingly rough terrain. The blade-scaled creature led them to a rocky outcrop where heat shimmered from cracks in the ground. Volcanic activity below the surface. And there, tucked into a depression lined with soft moss, were eggs, 0.7 of them, each as large as David's torso. And they were dying. David could see it in the discolored shells, feel it in the heat radiating from the ground. The volcanic activity had shifted, raising the temperature beyond what the eggs could tolerate. Another few days, and they would cook inside their shells. The blade-scaled creature pressed its head against the eggs, making that low rumble. Grieving, David set down his kit and started thinking. He was an engineer. This was a heat problem. Heat problems had solutions that he spent the rest of the day working. Used materials from his camp and natural resources. Rigged a cooling system using water from a nearby stream, channeling it through hollow bamboo-like plants. Created shade using broad leaves and salvaged pod fragments. Built thermal barriers between the hot ground and the eggs. The blade-scaled creature watched every movement, never interfering. Trusting by evening, David had lowered the nest temperature by 15 degrees. Not perfect, but survivable. He showed the creature how to maintain the water flow, how to replace leaves when they dried out. Simple maintenance that, even without hands, the predator could manage using its careful precision. The blade-scaled creature touched its head to David's chest, gentle despite its size, then settled around its eggs, but differently now. Not with the desperate grief from before. With hope, David walked back to camp with his escorts. His ribs ached from the work. His ankle throbbed, but he felt something he hadn't felt since the crash. Purpose. Over the next week, more creatures came. Not for food or healing. For their young. A flying predator with translucent wings brought eggs that needed specific humidity. David built a mist system. A burrowing creature brought pups that were too weak to dig. He created a soft earth enclosure with controlled temperature. Something that looked like it was made of living crystal brought hatchlings that needed specific light wavelengths. He rigged filters using pod materials to create the right spectrum. His camp transformed. The healing zone expanded. The feeding area became more organized, and new sections appeared. Nesting areas, nursery grounds, safe places for the young of species that should have been killing each other. The predators learned his systems, understood his markers. Red stones meant danger. Blue meant safe for young. Green meant fresh water. They taught their pack mates. They're young. The knowledge spread. David created rules without language. Boundaries that were respected. The copper giant would defend the healing zone. The gray hunter patrolled the nursery areas. The rust-colored runner, her pup now healed and energetic, kept scavengers away from food stores. They had formed a community. Impossible. Insane. But real. On day 15, David sat by his fire watching camp. Two juveniles play fighting under their mother's watchful eyes. An injured hunter resting in the healing zone. The blade-scaled creature visiting, checking on some eggs the flying predator had laid near its own nest. Different species. Different evolutionary paths. All existing together in the space this one human had built. The gray hunter approached and settled beside him. Close enough that David could feel the heat radiating from its body. It made a soft sound, almost a purr. "I know," David said quietly. "I don't understand it either." The creature leaned against him slightly, trusting weight. David had crashed on a death world expecting to die. Instead, he had built something unprecedented. A place where apex predators brought their young, where rivals shared food, where the wounded found safety. That he had created the most dangerous sanctuary in the galaxy. A place protected not by walls or weapons, but by the collective decision of creatures that could tear apart anything that threatened it. The rescue beacon in his pod was still active, still broadcasting. Eventually someone would come. But David looked around his camp, at the creatures who had chosen to trust him, and wondered if rescue was really what he wanted. Because this place, this impossible sanctuary built by human hands and maintained by predator cooperation, was worth more than escape, that IT was worth protecting. And somewhere in the jungle, the blade-scale creature settled around its eggs, which had started to show the first signs of movement. The first hints of life that would have been lost without the strange builder in the glowing camp. New life saved by old instincts working together in ways nature never intended. The rescue beacon activated at 0300 local time. David woke to the pulsing light from his pod's emergency panel, his heart immediately hammering against his damaged ribs. Someone had heard. Someone was coming. The predators sensed his distress immediately. The gray hunter was on its feet, scanning the jungle. The copper giant moved to the perimeter, tense and ready. Others stirred from sleep, responding to the change in David's scent, his breathing, his movements. David pulled up the beacon's receiver. Corporate salvage vessel, registered to Stellar Resources. ETA 16 hours. Standard extraction protocol. His hands started shaking. Standard protocol meant they would pull him out. Skin the planet for valuable resources. This world was a death world, which meant exotic biology. Rare minerals formed under extreme conditions. Predators that could be studied or harvested or turned into hunting trophies for rich clients. They would destroy everything he had built. David looked around his camp in the pre-dawn darkness. At the sleeping young in the nursery area. At the injured hunter the copper giant had brought in yesterday, still too weak to leave. At the eggs the blade-scale creature was protecting, now just days from hatching. All of it would die if corporate landed here. They would see valuable specimens, dangerous creatures to be eliminated or captured. Not the community that had formed, not the impossible sanctuary. He had 16 hours to decide. Get rescued and leave this all behind, or find a way to protect what he had created. The gray hunter approached and pressed its head against his leg. Questioning. "I know," David whispered. "I'm thinking." He spent the morning working on a plan. Used his engineering training to calculate, to scheme, to find the angles. Corporate salvage crews were efficient but predictable. They followed protocols. Those protocols had weaknesses. David started by sabotaging his own pod. Carefully. Made it look like the crash had damaged more than it actually had. Corrupted the black box data. Created false readings suggesting the planet was geologically unstable. Volcanic activity extreme. Atmospheric toxins at dangerous levels. Then he went further. He mapped his camp but changed it in the records. Made it look temporary. Desperate survival instead of planned construction. Removed all evidence of the predator's cooperation. Made everything appear as if he had been barely holding on, not thriving. The predators watched him work with confused attention. They understood something was wrong, that their human was preparing for a threat. But they didn't understand what that 8 midday. David gathered his medical kit and went to the blade-scaled creature's nest. The eggs were moving now, small bulges pressing against shells from inside. Life ready to emerge. "I need you to hide," he told the creature, knowing it couldn't understand words, but hoping it would understand intent. "All of you need to hide. When the new humans come, you can't be here." The blade-scaled creature rumbled. Its eyes, intelligent and ancient, studied David's face that he spent the next hours visiting each predator, each nest, each family group, using gestures and tone to communicate danger. "Stay away. Hide. Keep the young safe." They didn't leave. They moved to the jungle's edge, just beyond sight. Watching, the ship arrived exactly on schedule. A blocky corporate hauler designed for cargo and salvage, not elegance. It settled in the clearing David had marked as safe. Engine scorching plant life. 3 crew members emerged in environment suits. Standard corporate efficiency. Get in, extract the survivor, catalog resources, get out. David limped toward them, playing up his injuries. Made himself look desperate, damaged. Lucky to be alive. Shun David. Engineer, third class, he said when they reached him. Never thought I would see another human face. The crew leader, a woman named Rodriguez, ran a scanner over him. You're hurt, but stable. We will have you in medical within the hour. What happened? David told the story he had prepared. Pod failure during cargo transfer. Crash landing on what he thought was uninhabited. Barely surviving in hostile conditions. He showed them his sabotage pod, his desperate camp. Made everything look like pure luck instead of planning. The planet is unstable, he said, feeding them false data. Volcanic activity is increasing. Atmospheric toxins. I have been getting sick. He coughed for effect. Not safe for long-term operations. Rodriguez frowned at her scanner. Readings are contradictory. The atmosphere seems breathable. It is, but there's something in it. Maybe spores or microorganisms. Made me sick after a few days. David had actually infected himself with a mild illness from unwashed water. Minor fever. Nothing serious, but enough to sell the story. This place will kill anyone who stays too long. The crew collected samples. Ran scans. Found nothing immediately valuable in the areas David directed them to. Meanwhile, the predators stayed hidden. Silent. David could feel them watching from the jungle. Could sense their tension. Rodriguez made her decision. This rock isn't worth the resources to properly survey. We will mark it as hazardous and move on. Corporate won't waste money on a planet that will make crews sick. David felt relief wash through him. Understood. Let's get out of here. He walked toward the ship, carrying only his emergency kit. Left everything else behind. The camp, the water systems, the food stores, all of it functional. All of it waiting to AT the ship's ramp. He paused and looked back. Saw movement in the shadows. Gray-brown fur. Copper hide. Rust-colored patches. Black glass scales. They were watching him leave. Understanding, somehow, that he was protecting them by going. The gray hunter stepped slightly forward. Just enough that David could see its amber eyes in the shadows. Their gazes locked for a moment. Then David turned and walked up the ramp. The ship lifted off, leaving the camp intact. The predators emerged as soon as the engines faded. They moved through the abandoned structures, sniffed at the water systems still flowing, at the food stores still preserved. The blade-scaled creature settled around its eggs. The gray hunter curled up in the spot where David used to sleep. The copper giant took up patrol around the perimeter. They were keeping it alive, keeping his camp functioning, waiting to see if the strange builder would ever return. David filed his report 3 days after rescue, sat in a sterile corporate office and lied through his teeth. Planet designation 442J, geologically unstable. Atmospheric toxins confirmed. Wildlife aggressive and non-valuable. Recommended classification. Hazardous, no commercial viability. Restrict access to avoid liability. The corporate officer barely glanced at it. Another failed salvage operation. Another planet that wouldn't make the company money. He stamped it approved and moved on to the next file. David walked out of that office, knowing he had just saved an entire ecosystem with bureaucratic paperwork. But the victory felt hollow. He spent the next weeks in recovery, ribs healing properly, ankle finally getting real medical attention. The whole time he thought about the camp, about the gray hunter and the copper giant and the rust-colored runner with her pup, about the blade-scaled creature's eggs that should have hatched by now. Were they maintaining the water systems? Were the young surviving without his medical care? Had the sanctuary collapsed without him there to enforce the rules? He requested a transfer to deep space monitoring. Got assigned to a listening post that tracked unmapped systems, including 442J. Corporate had listed it as restricted, but still monitored it remotely for liability purposes. David pulled up the satellite data 6 months after his rescue. The camp was still there. Actually, it was bigger. The thermal scans showed structures that hadn't existed when he left. The water systems had been expanded using natural materials. More nesting areas. More defined zones. The predators had continued his work. Had understood what he was building well enough to keep building it themselves. David zoomed in on heat signatures. Dozens of creatures living in the camp area. Different species, different sizes, all existing together in the space he had created that IT was working. Even without him, 1 year after the crash, the satellite caught something new. The blade-scaled creatures young. 7 heat signatures matching the adult's thermal profile, but smaller. They were alive, thriving, learning to exist in this impossible community. 2 years after the crash, David watched the satellite feeds and saw something that made him stop breathing. New humans.no. Not humans, but the heat signatures were wrong for the local predators. Too regular. Too controlled. He enhanced the image and realized what he was seeing. The predators had started bringing other creatures to the camp. Injured animals from species that weren't predators. Prey animals. Small scavengers. Things that normally wouldn't survive a day in that jungle. They were expanding the sanctuary beyond just apex predators, creating a place where anything injured or young or weak could find safety. David's engineering project had evolved into something beyond his design. The predators had learned more than his systems. They had learned his principle: protect the vulnerable, share resources, create safety through cooperation instead of dominance. 3 years after the crash, corporate restructured. 442, Jay's file got transferred to a new division. Someone actually read David's report with attention, questioned the findings. David intercepted the inquiry, used his access to monitoring data to add more false readings, made the planet look even worse, added fictional seismic activity, invented atmospheric storms, anything to keep corporate away. He got written up for filing incomplete reports, took the reprimand without complaint. Small price for protecting what mattered. 5 years after the crash, David requested early retirement. He had enough saved, enough connections, and he had a plan. He bought a small personal transport. Nothing fancy, just enough ship to get to restricted space if he knew how to fake the right credentials, which he did. The landing was rough. His piloting skills were rusty, and the jungle had reclaimed his original crash site. But the camp, the sanctuary, was exactly where the satellites said it would be. David stepped out of his ship and found himself surrounded. The gray hunter was older now, grayer, but its amber eyes were the same. It approached slowly like that first night, studying him, then pressed its head against David's chest with a rumble that vibrated through his bones. Welcome back. The copper giant appeared with a younger version of itself, its offspring learning patrol routes. The rust-colored runner brought her pup, now fully grown with pups of its own. The blade-scaled creature emerged from the jungle with all 7 of its young following in precise formation. They remembered, even after 5 years. They remembered the human who had built this place. David walked through the camp with tears streaming down his face. The structures were crude but functional. The water systems maintained. The nesting areas carefully organized. They had kept it alive, improved it, made it their own. He set down his supplies and started working. Fix what needed fixing, improve what could be improved. But mostly he just existed in the space he had created, watching predators and prey coexist in ways that shouldn't be possible. 10 years after the crash, a research vessel discovered 442, J despite the restrictions. They found the camp, found the impossible ecosystem, found David living among creatures that should have killed him years ago. The researchers wanted to study it, document it. David told them the same thing he told everyone. This place exists because it was left alone, because the predators chose to create it. Human interference would destroy it. Some listened, others didn't, but enough respected the sanctuary that it remained protected, not by corporate greed or scientific interest, by the simple choice to leave something beautiful alone. David lived another 30 years on that death world, built more systems, helped more creatures, watched generations of predators teach their young the rules of the camp, the principles of cooperation. When he died, the gray hunter's great-great-grandchildren carried his body to a place of honor. The blade-scaled creatures lined the path with their young. Every predator in the sanctuary paid respect to the strange builder who had shown them a different way to survive. They buried him in the heart of the camp. And then they continued, maintained his systems, protected his rules. taught new arrivals the way of the sanctuary, because David had proven something fundamental. Survival wasn't just about being the strongest predator. It was about building something worth protecting together, and the camp endured. A testament to human ingenuity and to the capacity of any creature, no matter how fierce, to choose cooperation over violence, a sanctuary built by one human, maintained by hundreds of predators. Proof that even in the harshest environment, compassion could create something impossible.